The room had gone completely silent. 300 people in formal attire, investors, board members, journalists with press badges, still clipped to their lapels, sat frozen in the kind of silence that only happens when something irreversible is about to occur. The chandeliers above the grand ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel blazed with their usual indifference. The podium at the front of the room still bore the name Derek Merritt in gold lettering, because someone had ordered that placard 48 hours ago, when Derek was still absolutely certain he had already won. He had not won. The man standing at that podium was not Derek. He was not wearing a suit. His name was Nathan Cole, and the dark smudge visible beneath the nail of his right index finger was motor oil that no amount of scrubbing had fully removed. Because he had driven through the night, and there had not been enough time to scrub it away before this moment arrived. He held a black USB drive between his fingers, the way another man might hold a winning hand of cards. Behind him, on the enormous projection screen that Derek had ordered installed specifically to display his triumphant shareholder presentation, a spreadsheet had just materialized. Then an email chain. Then a series of wire transfer records dated across the previous 18 months. The woman standing in the doorway at the back of the ballroom wore no heels and no pearls. Her hair was loose, not styled. She had been in a car for 6 hours and it showed. But her spine was perfectly straight, and the expression on her face was the expression of a person who has spent a very long time waiting for the exact right moment and has just watched it arrive. Nathan's voice, when it came, was steady and quiet, in the way of a man who has learned that calm is more powerful than volume. "Before anyone escorts her out of this room," he said, looking directly at the two security guards who had begun moving toward Claire Merritt the moment she appeared in the doorway, "I'd suggest you look at the screen." No one moved toward Claire. Every eye in the room moved toward the screen. That was how it ended. But to understand why it meant anything at all, you have to go back to a Tuesday night 3 weeks earlier, when it was raining hard on Route 9. And a man in a pickup truck stopped because a woman in an expensive car was stranded on the side of the road, and neither of them understood yet what stopping would cost them. Nathan Cole had been driving Sophie home from her grandmother's house when he saw the hazard lights. The SUV was angled halfway onto the shoulder, with its hood up, rainwater already pooling in the engine cavity. Nathan pulled his truck behind it without thinking. He had been stopping for stranded vehicles since he was 16 years old, and his father first told him that a person who drives past someone in trouble is a person choosing to be the kind of man he didn't want his son to become. He told Sophie to stay in the truck with the heat on. The woman standing beside the SUV was somewhere in her mid-30s. She was wearing a charcoal suit jacket that was now soaked through, holding her phone in one hand with the particular stillness of a person who has been staring at a dead battery long enough to have moved past frustration into something quieter. She looked up when Nathan approached, and the expression that crossed her face was not relief exactly. It was the careful, measured assessment of someone who had learned to evaluate strangers quickly and thoroughly before deciding how much to trust them. "Alternator," Nathan said, looking at the engine. "Or the belt driving it. Hard to say for certain until I pull the covers." He glanced at her. "You've been here a while." 20 minutes, the woman said. "I called a tow service. They said 45 minutes to an hour." "Ooh. I can get it running enough to get you to the next town." He was already moving, reaching into the bed of his truck for the kit he kept there. Not fixed, but running. She watched him work without speaking. The rain came down hard on both of them. Nathan worked with the focused efficiency of a man who has performed this particular set of motions several thousand times, hands finding what they needed in the dark without having to see it. After 12 minutes, the engine turned over. "That's remarkable," the woman said. There was something precise about the way she spoke, as though she chose each word the same way a careful person chooses a tool. "It's not a permanent fix," Nathan said, wiping his hands on the shop rag he kept in his back pocket. "You'll need to get the alternator replaced before you drive it again tomorrow. Any decent shop can do it in under 2 hours. He tore a corner from the paper bag he kept on the passenger seat for Sophie's school snacks and wrote his number on it. "If you have trouble before you get to a shop, call that number." She looked at the scrap of paper. Then she looked up at him. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing." The woman opened her mouth and closed it again, which Nathan suspected did not happen to her very often. He was already walking back to his truck. From the passenger seat, Sophie's small face appeared in the window, watching with round eyes. "Dad," Sophie said when he climbed in. "Is she okay?" "She's okay." He put the truck in gear. She just needed a little help. In his rearview mirror, he could see the woman still standing beside her SUV, looking down at the scrap of paper in her hand. She had the look of someone encountering an equation she hadn't expected, and not yet knowing whether to solve it or discard it. Her name was Claire Merritt. Nathan did not know this yet. 3 days later, his phone rang while he was replacing a water pump on a 2011 Camry. He answered without looking at the screen because his hands were occupied, and the voice on the other end said, "This is Claire. You fixed my car on Route 9 Tuesday night." Nathan wiped his hands. "Alternator? Replaced this morning. The shop said you were right about the belt as well." A brief pause. "I have an unusual request. You can say no." He said he was listening. She explained it, with the directness of someone who had no patience for elaborate preambles. There was a charity gala on Friday evening. A Merritt Group event, her family's company. Her brother Derek was going to announce his engagement at the event, and the family dynamics around this announcement were, she said carefully, complicated. She needed someone to attend with her. Not as a performance. Not a hired role. Just a person standing next to her who had no stake in any of it, and no reason to pretend. "Why me?" Nathan asked. Another pause. "Because you stopped in the rain and didn't want anything for it," she said. "That's rarer than you'd think." Nathan was quiet for a moment, looking across his garage at the row of vehicles waiting for attention, at the coffee mug with Sophie's handprint on it that she had given him last Father's Day, sitting on the corner of his workbench. He thought about the fact that he had not been anywhere that required a collared shirt in over a year. "I'll need to arrange someone for my daughter," he said. "She's 9, of course." Claire's voice was steady and without judgment. "And I'll need to leave by 10. She has a soccer scrimmage Saturday morning." "Understood. All right," Nathan said. "I'll be there." He hung up and stood in his garage for a long moment, listening to the sound of traffic outside and the particular hum of fluorescent lights that he had lived with for so long it had become part of the architecture of his days. He could not have explained precisely what had made him say, yes. Something in her voice, perhaps. The careful honesty of it. The absence of performance. Or perhaps simply the fact that the last time he had put on a collared shirt for something other than a school event or a parent-teacher conference had been the night before his wife died. When he had worn a good shirt to the hospital because he didn't know what else to do, and it seemed important to look like he was holding things together. He decided not to think about that. He went back to the Camry. Sophie took the news with the gravity she brought to all significant developments, which is to say, she sat at the kitchen table with her chin in her hands and considered it from multiple angles before rendering judgment. "Is she nice?" "She seems straightforward," Nathan said. Sophie considered this. "Is she pretty?" "Sophie, that's a relevant question, Dad." She was 9. She delivered this with complete authority. "If she's mean and not pretty, this is a bad idea. If she's mean and pretty, this is also a bad idea. If she's nice and pretty, you're going to Grandma Linda's Friday night," Nathan said. Sophie sighed with the theatrical exhaustion of someone who has been managing an unreasonable adult for years. "Fine, but you have to text me." He rented a suit. Dark charcoal, white shirt, a tie that the man at the rental shop chose for him and that cost more than Nathan's usual grocery budget for 2 weeks. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and did not quite recognize the man looking back, which was not necessarily a bad feeling. Just a strange one. Sophie examined him with the critical eye of a professional. "You look good, Dad." She adjusted his tie with small, serious fingers. "But your shoes are kind of boring. These are my good shoes. They're your only shoes." This was accurate. He did not have a response to it. The Whitmore Hotel ballroom was everything Nathan had expected, and nothing he was prepared for. Crystal chandeliers. Round tables dressed in white linen with arrangements that probably cost more per table than Nathan made on a full day at the shop. 300 people in formal wear, moving through the kind of effortless social choreography that comes from a lifetime of practice. Claire met him in the lobby. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress and had her dark blonde hair up, and she looked like someone who had been born into this room. Which, Nathan was beginning to understand, she had been. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. "You look like you belong here," Nathan said. "I grew up here." Something in her voice suggested this was not entirely a compliment. "You look like you got dressed in a hurry." "I had to pick up Sophie's soccer shin guards from behind the dryer first," Nathan said. There was a delay. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something. They moved through the room with the practiced ease that Claire had clearly developed over decades of exactly this kind of event. She introduced Nathan to people whose names he immediately forgot, and whose net worths were probably more than he would earn in several lifetimes. He shook hands and nodded, and answered questions about what he did for a living, with the same calm he brought to every other situation, directly, without apology. It was the fourth time he mentioned that he owned an auto repair shop that Derek Merritt materialized beside them. Derek was the kind of man Nathan recognized immediately. Tall, handsome, immaculate in his suit, with the particular ease of someone who has never once had to calculate whether he could afford something. His fiancée Brooke stood at his elbow in a silver dress, smiling the smile of someone who knew she was being watched and had calibrated the smile for exactly that purpose. "There, Diet." Derek's greeting was warm in the way of a performance, not a feeling. His eyes moved to Nathan with the particular scan of a man taking inventory. "And you've brought someone. Wonderful." "Nathan Cole," Nathan said, extending his hand. Derek shook it. Firm, brief. His eyes had already noted the rental suit, the unremarkable shoes, the hands of a man who worked with them. "Nathan, and what is it that you do?" "I own an auto repair shop," Nathan said. "South side of the city, at Millionaire." The pause that followed was perhaps 2 seconds long. It felt longer. Brooke's smile adjusted itself almost imperceptibly. Derek's eyes moved to Claire with an expression that communicated something Nathan was not quite meant to see. "How charming," Brooke said. Her voice was pleasantly empty. "I didn't realize mechanics attended these events. Is this some kind of outreach initiative, Claire?" 3 people at the nearby table had turned to look. Nathan was aware of this, the way he was aware of wind direction when a storm was coming. Not panic, just information. Claire's voice was precise and cold. "Nathan is here with me, Brooke. That's the only initiative involved." Derek spread his hands in a gesture of practiced magnanimity. Of course. The more the merrier. We're very inclusive." His eyes returned to Nathan with that same pleasant, measuring quality. "Though I imagine this crowd is a bit different from your usual Friday nights. Must be quite a change of pace. What does a mechanic do for entertainment, Nathan? Oil changes and what? Bowling?" A few people nearby laughed. Small, polite, calibrated laughs. The kind that acknowledge a social hierarchy without being crude enough to be challenged. Nathan's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He knew without looking that it was Sophie, checking in the way she did when he was somewhere without her, the way she had since she was old enough to understand that people sometimes went places and didn't come back. He thought of her at his mother's house right now, probably watching a nature documentary and eating too many crackers because Grandma Linda had no concept of appropriate cracker portioning. He met Derek's eyes with the particular steadiness he had developed over years of standing in front of people who expected him to look away first. "I build things," Nathan said simply. "And I fix things when they break. Most people in this room have never done either." He paused for exactly 1 beat. "But I'm sure bowling is a lovely evening." The laughter that followed was different. Warmer. From more of the room. Derek's smile remained perfect. But something shifted behind it. In the car on the way home, Claire was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You didn't have to do that." "No," Nathan agreed. Another silence. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. Through the rain-streaked window, the city moved past in streams of light. The article appeared on a gossip site Monday morning, before Nathan had finished his first cup of coffee. He knew because his sister called him about it, which meant Sophie's school friends' parents had probably already seen it, which meant Sophie would likely hear about it by lunch. The photograph was taken at the gala, Nathan and Claire in conversation near the bar. Not touching, not particularly close, just two people talking. The caption read, Merritt Group CFO, Claire Merritt's mystery date at Friday's charity gala. Sources say he's a mechanic from the South Side. Is the company in steadier hands than we thought? Or is this what a leadership crisis looks like in formal wear? Nathan put down his coffee and picked up the phone. Sophie came home from school that afternoon with the particular silence she used when something had happened that she was deciding how to feel about. She sat at the kitchen table while Nathan made dinner and did not say anything until he put the pasta bowl in front of her. Then, Aiden Garcia said his dad saw a picture of you on the internet. He said you were at a fancy party with a rich lady. Nathan sat down across from her. That's accurate, he said. Dad said she was slumming it. Sophie looked down at her fork. I had to look up what that meant. The word landed somewhere specific in Nathan's chest. He let it sit there for a moment before he answered. What do you think it means? Sophie looked up. Her expression was the one she got when she was working through a math problem that wasn't adding up. I think it means they think you're not good enough for her world. She paused. But that's stupid, right? You fixed her car. Yeah, Nathan said. I fixed her car, and you didn't even charge her. No. Sophie turned her pasta thoughtfully. I think people who say things like that are scared, she said finally. I read this thing in my science book about how animals make loud noises when they're afraid, to seem bigger than they are. She took a bite. Aiden Garcia's dad seems loud. Nathan looked at his daughter for a long moment. 9 years old, and she had already figured out something it had taken him the better part of a decade to understand. You're very smart, he said. Sophie shrugged with elaborate modesty. I know. She pointed her fork at him. Also, you should call her. The lady from the party. I think you'll like her. Nathan opened his mouth. Don't say Sophie, Sophie said. Just call her. He did not call her that evening. But he thought about the way Claire had looked in the car on the way home. The careful way she chose her words. The thing in her voice that sounded like someone who had learned not to need things from people, because the lesson of needing had been too expensive. He recognized that particular way of holding yourself. He had developed it too, after Julie died, after he had understood what it meant to build your life around a person and then have to dismantle everything and start again, smaller and more careful and alone. He washed the dishes. He helped Sophie with her reading homework. He checked the locks and turned off the kitchen lights and lay in the dark for a long time before falling asleep. Claire called him the following Thursday. Her voice was different, compressed, controlled in the way of someone applying pressure to a wound. She needed to see him. Not a social call. She would explain when she got there. She arrived at the garage at 7 in the evening, after closing. She was in work clothes still, jacket over her arm, and she had the look of someone who had been sitting at a desk making very difficult decisions for a very long time. She sat in the chair beside his workbench, the one Sophie claimed after school every day, and told him the truth. Not all of it at once. In the careful, sequential way of someone who has organized information into the order that will make it comprehensible rather than devastating. Merritt Group had been founded by her father, Robert Merritt, who had died 14 months ago after a long illness. In his will, he had left 51% of the company's voting shares to Claire, conditional on her formal acceptance of the role of chief executive officer at the company's annual shareholder meeting, which fell this coming Friday. If she accepted and took the seat, the company was hers to lead. If she did not appear, or if she appeared and was successfully removed by vote of the board, the shares reverted to Derek. For 14 months, Claire had been the CFO, managing the finances, preparing for the transition, building her case to the board. For 14 months, Derek had been systematically dismantling that case, not obviously, not crudely, but with the patient, architectural precision of someone who had been planning this long before their father died. The rogue articles, the insinuations about her judgment, the photograph from the gala, with its carefully calibrated caption. These had not been coincidences. Derek had cultivated relationships with 3 gossip publications, and at least 2 financial blogs for the specific purpose of controlling the narrative around his sister's competence. But that was not the worst of it. The worst of it was the audit trail. For 18 months, beginning 6 months before their father's death, When it had become clear that Robert Merritt was not going to recover, Derek had been redirecting company assets through a series of subsidiary transactions that moved money to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. Small amounts at first, then larger. The total transferred was approximately $47 million. Brooke, Derek's fiancée, was not simply a socialite. She was a certified public accountant who had once worked for the firm that had audited Merritt Group's books. She had signed off on financial statements that concealed the transfers. She had done this in exchange for an equity stake in the shell corporation, and for Derek's promise of marriage, which was perhaps the most calculated transaction of all. The external auditor, who had reviewed and approved Brooke's work, was a man named Warren Cole. Nathan sat very still. "Cole," he said. Claire met his eyes. "Your uncle, I know." The pause that followed was the space where she could have said more, and chose not to. Nathan stood up and walked to the far end of the garage and stood with his hands braced against the wall for 30 seconds. Then he walked back. "The night your car broke down," he said. "Was that an accident?" Claire's jaw was tight. "I ran your name through a background check before I called you. I knew about Warren. I thought—" She stopped. Reorganized. "I thought if things escalated and I needed to reach him, having an introduction through family might be the only way. I didn't plan for—" Another stop. "I didn't plan for you." The way she said it was not a manipulation. It was simply a fact that had become complicated. Nathan thought about Sophie at his mother's house right now. He thought about Warren Cole, who had left a family dispute over Nathan's grandfather's estate 10 years ago, and had not spoken to any of them since. He thought about a woman who had come to a charity gala alone because she was running out of options and running out of time. "All right," he said. "Tell me everything you have. Every document, every number, every name." "Nathan, you came here because you needed help," he said. "I'm helping. Talk." What followed was 3 hours at the workbench with papers spread across every available surface, his laptop open next to her tablet. Two people reconstructing a financial architecture that had been designed to be invisible. Nathan had spent 4 years as a systems engineer at a financial software company before Julie's diagnosis, before everything changed. Before he had stepped back from a career that required travel and late nights, and the kind of focus that left no room for a sick wife and a newborn daughter who needed a father who was present. He had not used those skills in 4 years. But they were still there. They had not gone anywhere. What he found in Claire's documents was elegant in the way that sophisticated fraud is always elegant, not crude theft, but a system, a series of legitimate-seeming transactions that only revealed their true pattern when you looked at the aggregate, when you stepped back far enough to see the shape rather than the individual elements. By 11 o'clock, he had reconstructed the full flow. By midnight, he had located 3 cached backup files in a company archive system that Warren Cole had apparently not known existed when he approved the audit. Files that preserved the original unaltered records and proved conclusively that the submitted versions had been modified. By 1 in the morning, everything was on a USB drive. Claire sat across from him at the workbench. She had her jacket off and her sleeves rolled up, and she looked less like a CFO than she had at any point since he had known her. She looked tired and furious and precise, and more real than almost anyone he could think of. "You could have told someone else," Nathan said. "A lawyer, a forensic accountant. I have a lawyer. He's filing a separate action." She looked at him steadily. "But the shareholder meeting is in 41 hours. Legal proceedings move at a different speed than shareholder votes. So this is the fast track. This is the only track." "Ah." They looked at each other across the workbench, and the scattered papers, and the cold coffee, and the evidence of 18 months of calculated betrayal. "I need to be at that meeting," Claire said. "Not by video conference. Not through a proxy. In person. If I'm not standing in that room when the vote happens, Derek controls the narrative and the outcome. He's spent 14 months making me look unstable. I have to walk in and not look it." Nathan nodded. He picked up the USB drive and turned it in his fingers. "I'll drive," he said. They left at 3 in the morning. Nathan had called his mother to stay with Sophie, who had been asleep and would not know until morning that he had gone. He had written a note and left it on her pillow, The way he always did when something took him away before she woke. The same 3 words he had written every time since she was old enough to read. Back soon. Dad. The drive to the city took just over 5 hours. They talked for most of it, not about the meeting, not about the evidence, but about the things that people talk about when they are exhausted, and the night is dark, and there is nothing left to protect. Nathan talked about Julie, about the 2 years of her illness, and the particular specific grief of watching someone become less and less present while still being there. He talked about Sophie, and the way she was like her mother, and the way she was entirely her own person, and the terror and grace of that. Claire talked about her father, about the pressure of being Robert Merritt's daughter, the specific weight of a parent who loved you completely and also expected everything from you simultaneously. She talked about a relationship that had ended when the man she trusted had taken information she confided to him and shared it with Derek. She talked about the particular way that betrayal changes the architecture of a person, how it doesn't destroy trust so much as it renovates it, makes it smaller and more carefully enclosed. Outside, the highway moved beneath them, and the sky began to lighten in the east, the slow gray that arrives before dawn, uncertain and clean. Your daughter, Claire said at some point in the 4th hour. She texted you at the gala. I saw you look at your phone. She checks in when I'm somewhere without her, Nathan said. She's been doing it since she was old enough to figure out texting. Since her mother died? Since before. Julie was sick for a long time before she died. Sophie was young, but she understood that people could be there and then not be there. She checks in. Claire was quiet for a moment. What did the text say? Nathan glanced at the road. She asked if I was okay. Another silence. Are you? Claire said. Nathan thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. More than I've been in a while, he said. Yeah. They arrived at the Whitmore Hotel at 8:47 in the morning. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for 9. The lobby was already moving with the purposeful energy of an event about to begin, people in business attire moving toward the ballroom, with the particular focus of those who had somewhere important to be. In a conference room off the lobby, Derek Merritt was reviewing his remarks with the quiet confidence of a man who has already written the ending. His assistant had confirmed 3 hours ago that Claire had not checked into the hotel. His contacts had reported no flight, no train. The assumption was clear. She had not come. The ballroom filled. 300 people. The board of directors arranged at the front table. Cameras from the financial press positioned along the walls. The Merritt Group banner hung above the stage with the company logo, dark blue and gold. The colors of something Nathan associated with every institution that had ever looked at him and calculated his worth in about 4 seconds. Derek took the podium at 9:03, and his first words were measured and regretful, in the way of someone performing grief they do not feel. I want to begin by acknowledging my sister's absence today. Claire has been under tremendous pressure this past year, and it's my understanding that she has decided to step back from the operational demands of this transition. I think we all wish her well. Miranish, Patgadiko. No. 300 people nodded or murmured or wrote things on the notepads in front of them. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Derek saw her before most of the room did. The color left his face in a single, complete movement, like water draining. Claire Merritt walked through those doors in yesterday's clothes, her hair loose, no heels, a woman who had been in a car for 6 hours and had not slept, and did not need to pretend that any of those things were not true. She walked down the center aisle of the ballroom without hurrying, and without looking at anything other than the podium at the front of the room. Beside her, a step behind and to her left, Nathan Cole walked through the shareholders of Merritt Group, in the same work clothes he had been wearing since 3 in the morning. The room was so quiet that the sound of their footsteps on the marble floor was audible. Derek's voice, when he found it, was controlled by sheer will. Claire, this is... You're welcome, of course. Derek, Claire said. She was at the podium now. She turned and addressed the room directly, because the room was who this was for. I apologize for the dramatic entrance. We drove through the night, and I didn't have time to change. She turned briefly to Nathan. If you could manage the laptop. Nathan crossed to the presentation laptop on the side table. He inserted the USB drive. He opened the files. On the screen above the stage, a spreadsheet appeared. Then, A second one beside it. Then, an email. Then a series of wire transfer records. Nathan's voice was quiet and conversational when he spoke, which was somehow more devastating than if he had shouted. "These are two versions of the same financial report," he said. "The one on the left is the original. The one on the right is what was submitted to this board for the past 18 months. He advanced the slide. "These are the modification timestamps. And this is the access log for the user account that made those modifications." Okay. He had done this kind of presentation before, years ago, for a different audience in a different life, for a company that had made him good at this, and then watched him walk away without understanding why he had to. He had not lost the knack for it. The ability to take complex information and make it legible to people who were not specialists, that was not something that went away. It simply waited. The room listened. The board members leaned forward. One of the journalists had begun typing. Derek tried twice to interrupt. The first time, the board chairman held up a hand without looking away from the screen. The second time, one of the senior board members said flatly, "Derek, sit down." Warren Cole, who was seated at the end of the board table, had gone the color of old paper. He was looking at Nathan with an expression Nathan had no name for. Recognition and shame and something older, something from a family history that had ended 10 years ago over a property dispute and had apparently not ended at all. Nathan did not look back at him. Not yet. There would be time for that later, or there would not, and either way it was a different conversation for a different day. The vote to remove Claire Merritt from the board of directors and refer the matter to law enforcement passed 14-0. Brooke, who had been seated in the front row, left the room quietly before the count was complete. A security officer followed her. Derek stood at the podium for a moment after the vote was announced. He looked at his sister. Then he looked at Nathan, and the look carried everything that a man of his type looks like when the architecture of his certainty collapses, not rage, but the particular blankness of someone who had been so completely convinced of the outcome that the actual outcome had not been included in any of his preparations. He walked out through the side door. Claire was named Chief Executive Officer of Merritt Group by the board that same morning, effective immediately. The vote was unanimous. 1 week later, Nathan locked the garage at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening and turned around to find a woman standing on the sidewalk in jeans and a plain gray jacket and flat shoes, her hair down around her shoulders, holding nothing in her hands. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. "You look different," he said. "I don't have anywhere to be tonight," Claire said. "This is what I look like when I don't have anywhere to be." She paused. "It doesn't happen often." Inside his truck, Sophie was visible through the windshield, seat-belted in the passenger seat with a book open on her lap, one finger tracking the line she was reading. She had been waiting for her father to finish locking up. She looked up at the sound of the conversation outside, assessed the situation with the speed and thoroughness that 9-year-olds deploy when they sense that something significant is occurring, and then returned deliberately to her book in a performance of not watching that was almost convincing. "I wanted to ask you something," Claire said. "And I wanted to ask it here, not in a boardroom or a hotel lobby or anywhere that has a function. Just here." "All right," Nathan said. "Can I buy you and Sophie dinner?" She met his eyes. "Not a gala. Not a networking event. Just dinner. The three of us. Somewhere that has paper napkins." Nathan looked at his daughter in the truck. Sophie's eyes had risen from her book again and were fixed on Claire with the focused evaluative attention of someone conducting a very important assessment. Then Sophie gave a small, decisive nod. The nod of a person who has made up her mind. He looked back at Claire. "Sophie has opinions about restaurants," he said. "I'd expect nothing less." He walked to the truck and opened the passenger door. Sophie slid her book into her bag with the unhurried calm of someone who had seen this coming. "Sophie," Nathan said. "This is Claire." Sophie looked at Claire with a direct, unguarded appraisal that only children and very honest adults manage. Then she said, "Do you like milkshakes?" "Very much," Claire said. Sophie considered this for one more moment. Then she grabbed her backpack and climbed out of the truck. "There's a place 2 blocks from here," she said. "They put extra whipped cream, if you ask nicely." She started walking. "Come on. Gee." They followed her down the sidewalk, under the amber glow of the streetlights. This particular Tuesday evening in a city that was already thinking about other things. Sophie walked slightly ahead, backpack bouncing, narrating something about a science project that involved vinegar and baking soda and a great deal of mess. Claire was listening, genuinely listening, the way she listened to everything, with complete attention. Nathan walked beside her, not touching, not performing anything, simply moving through the ordinary end of an ordinary workday, in the direction of milkshakes and whatever came next. There was no announcement, and no resolution. There was just the sidewalk, and the child ahead of them, still talking about the science experiment, and the particular specific warmth of walking next to someone and not needing it to be anything more than what it was. Sometimes that is exactly enough.